Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, thanks for that. You bring us back on course there, really. I've got a little question written down here. We as an organisation, BCS, are being asked to help people write green IT strategies, as I'm sure you know. What would you be looking for in an individual in terms of skill sets for someone that you would trust to write a decent green IT strategy?
Well, I think the person is a very rare breed. He's got to have really.
Must have a notional set.
Well,
of skills.
he needs. What I was going to say, he needs probably some experience of the ITIL library.
Mm-hmm.
He probably needs some formal project management training. If he's operating in the green IT sphere, he really should have the foundation certificate for green IT, which is a BCS exam and Bob helped create. Then you go on a step further and you've got the EU Code of Conduct for data centres, which is basically we'll come on to that later on, but that's another intermediate certificate. I understand that there's a practitioner and maybe a senior consultant exam and development program in case. But I think the remit of the person, he's got to be worldly wise, and he's got to understand that there are best practices that you can pull from different companies to create the strategy. And he's also got to be a strategist. So how many people with those skills out there in the market? Who knows? Not many.
I think what you're saying is that not many people have very good IT green strategies at the moment. Then,
well,
there
there are some open green IT policies which are quite general, which a company can use, but it depends on how the man who's signing the checks, whether or not he's going to take those strategies on board.
So what does this look like in an organisation? Is it a very specific role in a larger organisation?
I think in a large organisation, it probably is. The technical knowledge, the data, the information awareness to be able to drive these things through projects and to make them form a part of the broader strategy is probably in a larger organisation if you like, a full-time role, or at least a very major, significant part of an individual's job.
And he's got to be quite senior.
Yes.
Because otherwise the message isn't going to get down through the ranks.
I would say it needs to be somebody who understands the organisation.
Yeah.
You know, things like ITIL, most of the most rapidly growing companies I know wouldn't go near it with a barge pole.
No.
You know, so it's okay for one end of the spectrum, but many companies applying things like agile methodologies.
Yep.
But I'd say I couldn't see someone coming in from the outside and doing it. I would say it would have to be someone within the organisation with some technical understanding, ideally in a management position, who's able to think strategically. I mean, if it was me, I'd look for someone with something of a scientific background, to be honest. Whereas often I think it ends up being someone more from the marketing side of the business, which often isn't so ideal. In my case, I did it myself because there wasn't really anyone else.
In that case, though, Kate, would you not have, you've got the person, an internal person who understands his organisation but may not have the access to the other bits and pieces that are required to create the strategy? Would you not think that maybe they could work together?
Rocket science. The EU Code of Conduct's really simple. Other accreditations,
that's an interesting. You're right. It is simple, and it's simple to people like us. But I have been on loads of calls recently where I'm trying to explain the Code of Conduct to data centre owner operators, and they do not have the first clue of how to implement those very basic best practices into their data centre, because it's not something they've come across. Now remember, this is retrofit, not new build. So retrofitting in the CEDA and the BCS EU Code of Conduct as a data centre is going to be hard work, and then you've got the added problem of keeping the facility up and running whilst you're doing all these changes.
The Code of Conduct is part of the point. It doesn't require any massive refit. It's an ongoing, steady process of improvement, and a lot of it is really quite basic stuff. And really quite common sense.
It is,
as well.
But there seems to be a lack of common sense in the data centre industry and in certain areas, your case accepted. And I think one of the other problems is that there are some government facilities especially, and the larger organisations, they may have what are classed as data centres under the Code of Conduct, but you and I would not recognise as a data centre. These are more communications rooms. And they don't have ownership. Nobody has ownership of those. And I've been in situations where I've been there to install a server into a rack, and I say to them, well, where are we getting our power from? Where's your network? oh, okay, and I haven't even got a space for this box to go in, and yet it was a rather large retail bank. And, you know, so the management of space, power, network issues in certain facilities are not under the role of one person.
Yeah,
And
I
I
think it's recognising, as you said, Kate, earlier, that we need to elevate that perspective onto the boards, onto the governance
What
in the
about small
organisation.
organisations though? I mean, large ones, that's fine, isn't it, for large
Yeah.
organisations? Perhaps it's going to be a dedicated resource in the
Yeah.
future. What would we like to see in terms of giving smaller organisations access to some of these skill sets?
Well, I think it is about doing the sort of things that BCS has started to do in terms of making available training materials, making available a pool of resource. It's something we're trying to do on the Green SG, is to work towards providing best practice and guidance that people can pull down themselves, as a cloud service maybe, so that it's accessible and we can keep that refreshed with the learning that is going on, because this is a fast moving area. I think we're all finding it very hard to keep abreast of where the benefits and where the challenges are and how new solutions for meeting those. The only other thing I just wanted to say was this issue around embedding, and that I think one of the key things that I'm facing as a challenge in the work in government is actually embedding green thinking, sustainability thinking into everyday processes. Into whether it's ITIL or ATOL or whatever, it's actually getting people to think when they're doing business planning, when they're doing business process re-engineering, when they're doing systems analysis, is to get into thinking, how are we going to make this more efficient? What opportunities are there for IT to assist with this? And making sure in organisations, and if just a SME, that whoever takes decisions about where investments go is brought aware of the opportunities that technology can bring to do that more efficiently and sustainably. Sorry, Kate,
I'd
you
say it's
again.
potentially a slightly contentious one, but I'd say if it's a small business that isn't an IT company, they shouldn't own any IT. They should be outsourcing everything. It should just be a few
That's what we're
desktops.
trying to do,
If they're a small business that is in IT, then they should have someone at the top who already understands, and it should be the CFO or the CEO taking that as part of their remit, and you know, looking at ways to drill down on the efficiency side, and then communicate how they're efficient onto their end user.
And that's a very good point, Kate. But unfortunately, I've seen small SME IT businesses who are so fearful of the cloud because they can just see their big server sales and their desktop sales and their maintenance sales disappearing. And they're very reluctant to engage with other companies and suggest cloud services. They're actually saying, oh, you don't want to go into the cloud, there's this issue, there's that issue, there's this issue. What you need is a nice new server and a 3-year maintenance plan.
That's Mr. Turkey's one.
It's indeed, yeah. And then that's their issue, I think.
Yeah.
If they're not going to respond to the changing marketplace, the changing businesses,
That's going to overtake
It's
them.
going to change. It's going to
But
evolve.
That's
they
okay,
are-
because their inefficiencies will be, they will be the chaff
Indeed.
separated from the wheat.
Yeah,
So.
but they do have, you know, a number of clients that they are basically preventing their move to the cloud by basically protecting their own environment.
Like the CTO.
And you know, the IT guy, he might be external. If they ask him for advice, because he's got no knowledge of it, he's just going to go with his IT provider who's been helping him out for the last 20 years. Even if he says to him, you know, what about this cloud? Maybe I should go into the cloud. Is that going to cost me? Oh no, you want to go in there, security issues, blah 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 blah. And no, you want to buy a nice new server and da. Everything's fine, but that is an issue.
Going back to our conversation earlier about BT, you know, BT is a barrier to SMEs to the cloud because ADSL is not reliable. It's just not reliable to business grade. So if you end up with a small business that wants some reliable connectivity to put all its business critical applications up in the cloud, then you know they've got to start putting in fibre. And actually, you can look at significant multiples of cost to move to cloud for these organisations to actually be guaranteed some reliability. I think really what's going to change over time is that they're going to become more dependent on the internet regardless of where they locate their applications. And so they're going to have to revert to a system of reliable internet, because whether they've got their applications located locally or in the cloud, they're going to need that internet. And that's how things are going to evolve, that's going to force small business into that arena.
And it also means that you will see a lot of rural businesses either probably failing or moving into the cities to take advantage of high-speed broadband. And it's a shame really, because we've got an opportunity that's coming up, which with the smart metering and smart grids for the rural environment and in the city to provide connectivity at a bigger rate to support the smart grid, but also to give the rural businesses the access pipes that they need in order to access the cloud. But I've spoken to some of the electricity companies, what are you doing about your smart grid? Oh, we're going to go with mobile telephony. So that kind of destroys...
It's like, high speed. Yeah. So let's spend tens of billions building a fast rail link on the basis that business people apparently don't work on trains. Who knew? If Intellect applied the same methodology that they use to do the cost-benefit analysis of what if we do super-fast broadband, it's a complete no-brainer. But unfortunately, it's often we're not facing rational decision makers.
And unfortunately, smart grid's got a load of money coming to it from government, but they're not going to be using that at the same time. Why don't you join the rural broadband initiative, which is £500 million floating around, plus add it to the smart grid initiative, and you've got a bigger pot of money. But they're going to be completely siloed. None will speak to t'other, and we'll get a hodgepodge of systems, which the local councils are going to be responsible for delivering in certain places, which will be quite interesting to see how they perform.
Well, I think we've had quite a wide-ranging discussion there, haven't we? You folks are all involved with BCS in the Green Specialist Group, aren't you? So really, I would view you as, or Data Centre Specialist Group. I think we can quite rightly view you as thought leaders in this area. So I think what I'd like to just close with asking you is what you really want to see happen. How is this going to develop in 5 years if the BCS specialist groups are doing what they should be doing?
Well, myself and Kate will probably disagree on this, but I would actually like to see some sort of legislation to say that code of conduct should be mandatory across all data centres for all companies, and I think also PC power management needs to be mandatory as well.
Okay, thank you.
I think that's probably true. I think what we will see over the next 5 years is a bit of a change of attitude as people enter the workforce for whom the internet and technology has been something they've grown up with throughout their life. And I think what we need to do as a specialist group is to piggyback and enable and support those changes to happen, because a lot of those attitudes will be the right sorts of attitudes towards these kind of activities.
Okay.
Actually, what I'd like to see, potentially a bit contentious, I think the existing legislation is broken. It doesn't provide a way to pass carbon down the supply chain. I'd like to see Britain taking lead and being the first to implement carbon added tax. So basically every product or service has a carbon footprint on it that can be passed down the supply chain, because exposing that information is really key. And for the IT industry, we will be the enablers of that, and also providing the software, but also we need the skills to back that up, which will be quite technical, I think. So that's where I'd like to see. So not entirely different.
I think the two things I'd like to see us move towards in the next 5 years, he said very cautiously. Certainly one is the networking provision and the way we've ended up discussing just now, the way we are tying our hands behind our back in various opportunities that are being presented to us are not being taken. And that points to getting IT thinking and green IT thinking into the centre of policy making around infrastructures and development in government. And also in terms of business support in government. And I think the second thing is to try to get the BCS into a place where it is seen as a repository, as I mentioned earlier, the opportunity we have here, of if you like, non-proprietary, non-invested interest in advice, guidance, a pool of resource that is actively available to people through whatever mechanism they choose to use, and also to be able to participate and contribute to that development. And that's something we're trying to work towards with certainly the Green SG, and I'm sure the Data Centre SG colleagues there and Kate is doing the same thing, that we need to help as far as we can with the knowledge we have here and beyond to pull that and make it more permanently available.
Peter?
I'd like to see support for innovation in our domestic market. What do I mean by that? I'd like to see a domestic market that is a strong domestic market for low carbon innovation in IT, whether green by IT or green for IT. And I think the government needs to act in order to bring this about and make up for 10 years of neglect or more in this area. So that, you know, all the innovation that's going on, because there's masses of innovation in this space in this country. You know, we've got universities with multi-million pound grants for research in this area, but our domestic market is weak, and we need to take that innovation, build on it, so that we can actually be an exporter in this area. And the way we can do that is to have a good domestic market to really fuel and run that engine for export. And have some nice new companies coming out the woodwork with this innovation that us British are so good at. But at the moment, our domestic market really isn't that supportive of anything in this space.
That's quite interesting, because effectively, if you invest in some green IT, you're likely to be saving yourself energy, which means that your cost base goes down, and it's a win-win all round. And I think the problem at the moment is that so many businesses are struggling just to keep afloat, that they've really taken their eye off any resource efficiency measures they can take. And that's just not in IT, that's in energy, that's in insulation, that's in waste, you know, redesigning their products to use less waste, which gives them a chance to recycle stuff. I mean, they're just so focused on staying alive that all of this waste reduction measures
Well,
will
that's
just
the short
disappear.
term, as we've mentioned a number of times, isn't it?
But I fear that what will happen is, once economic times do come back, those resource inefficiencies will still be there, and now they won't be more focused on them because the good times have returned.
Well, a parallel thing that BCS are doing, of course, is the Entrepreneurship and Innovation Programme, which I hope you've all been keeping an eye on. Perhaps you haven't. There's a special area on the website, and I guess some stuff around this green skills would be excellent, wouldn't it, in that space? So we'll look at doing that. But for this morning, John, Colin, Kate, Bob, Peter, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Cheers, Grant.